All right, I think this is a great time to get started. So let me do that officially by saying welcome to another MassMedic webinar. I'm Rachel Robinson, the Chief Operating Officer at MassMedic. Absolutely thrilled to be with you and to be a fly on the wall in what is going to be an incredible conversation. We do encourage Q&A. So there is, if you're familiar with Zoom webinar, everyone, there's a button usually at the bottom or the side of your screen that says Q&A. You can pop your questions into that window throughout. And Bryan and Paul will get to them as much as they can with time, but we absolutely encourage it. This is going to be an incredible conversation talking about industry and innovation, and we're so thrilled that you're here joining us for this. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Bryan Gilpin and say, please get us kicked off with this great conversation.
Okay, Rachel, thank you. Thrilled to be here. Maybe one quick correction. So I'll try to save Q&A to the end. We'll leave about 15 minutes, more or less, so you'll have plenty of time to ask questions. And I think we got a lot of ground to cover. Very excited to be here. So I'll introduce myself. I'm Bryan Gilpin. I'm the president of Suntra MedTech Solutions. Some of you may know us formerly as Sunrise Labs. It's great to see so many of you across New England joining us. For those who are new to MassMedic, MassMedic is the largest regional medtech organization connecting large strategic startup investors and the many partners who make this ecosystem thrive. And for those who don't know Suntra MedTech Solutions, we're a company that provides consulting, engineering, and innovation services to many of the pioneers in our industry. And then on to Paul. Paul, you don't need an introduction, but I'm going to do it anyway. So Paul is someone who has truly helped shape the medtech industry. He's the CEO and co-chairman of Pulse Biosciences, managing partner at SV Health Investors, and former chief operating officer at Boston Scientific. And Paul, if you don't mind, for those who don't know you, it is worthwhile for me just to read through your bio because you cover so much ground in so much of our world. So Paul has been at SV since 2009. And prior to SV, Paul built and ran medical device businesses for 29 years. And most recently was the COO of Boston Scientific. That's where he and I met. During his 15 years at Boston Scientific, Paul served as the chief operating officer, group president, endosurgery, and group president cardiovascular, president cardiology, group president endosurgery, and president international. Paul integrated 24 acquisitions and led extensive product development, manufacturing, and worldwide commercial organizations. Previously, Paul held marketing and general management positions at C.R. Bard and various marketing roles at Kendall, which is now part of Medtronic. And outside of SV, Paul does a lot in our community as well. He serves on the board of Edwards Life Sciences, and also the Medical Device Manufacturers Association, and is chairman of the Innovation Growth Board at the Mass General Brigham Health System. And in addition, Paul serves on the board of Vibrato Medical as a director. And he also served on the board of AdvaMed for 10 years. And many of you know him from his various speaking and conference engagements as well. So, Paul, I don't know how you do it.
Just fear of failure, Bryan. Just keep showing up, man.
I appreciate that. And I'll add that I'm personally thrilled, Paul, to be here with you. We spent some days at Boston Scientific. You're an inspiration to me and so many of the others. And I'm grateful to have you here today and that you're able to join us.
Well, I'm honored to be here. MassMedic is obviously core to so much that's gone on for decades here, where I sit at an innovative company in Massachusetts. So yeah, I'm thrilled to be a part of this.
Great. Okay, so over the next 45 minutes or so, we'll focus the conversation on a topic, Paul, that I know you know very well, medtech innovation. And we'll dive into a whole realm of innovation, where it's headed, how it happens inside different organizations, how investors are thinking about things like emerging technologies, and then what leadership lessons can stand the test of time that you've seen throughout your career. And again, we'll try to leave a little bit of time for Q&A at the end. All right, so let's dive in. All right, so Paul, I want to start by going back to your time as COO of Boston Scientific. You and I were there during a period of tremendous growth and transformation for the company. Between the years of 1994 and 2008, the company grew revenue over 20 times. It was just a gangbuster years. And it was achieved through a combination of organic growth, international expansion, and lots of acquisitions. Now, what's interesting there, so is being in that environment, looking back, a lot of companies were investing heavily in minimally invasive surgery. Boston Scientific wasn't the only one. And a lot of the other companies could make the same acquisitions that Boston Scientific made. But what was it that you see that made Boston Scientific uniquely successful? And what did Boston Scientific do that the other companies did not?
Yeah, it's a great question. There were some great companies, and many companies actually back in those days, and I think back to those days, Medtronic was established, but bigger. Guidant was just a baby. We had St. Jude Medical, Stryker. There were a lot of companies, I would say, in the same stage of growth. And so the difference was Boston was actually younger. Boston was a relatively new company brought together by, as you know, John Abley and Pete Nicholas. And they really were focused exclusively on minimally invasive procedures. And we think today about cardiovascular kind of leading the world. Back in those days, really, Boston did not have a cardiology franchise to speak of. And so if I think about the innovative patterns that Boston was following, it was really in the endoscopy business, the urology business, the peripheral vascular and interventional radiology businesses, where Boston really did innovate almost everything from scratch and created the whole concept of just taking catheter or device or cannula based interventional technologies and driving the potential for new therapies. So it was really the minimally invasive approach. It was really catheter based and trying to find a way to innovate with miniaturization, with new materials, with micro machining technologies today, frankly, that we would look at and think they were, quite unsophisticated. I'd say the second thing was that Boston was never about selfishness or about not invented here. A lot of companies struggle with the balance between internal and external innovation because they get good at something and they want to drive that. And then they become possessive of their own sense of worth, if you will, built on, well, this is how we do things. Boston was never that way. Boston was always willing to embrace the idea that someone else may have a better answer than we do. We should be totally open. We don't have all the good ideas. And so if somebody else has something that makes sense and we can add to it and we can speed it up and we can put it in our commercial channel and we can add synergies and take that idea of an innovation and move it across our platforms, then let's go ahead and buy it and let's build it into our fabric. And I think Boston uniquely did that in a selfless way, better than its peers at that time.
Yeah, fantastic. And it was interesting during that time, I think from a lot of outsiders, they looked at the growth as being so acquisition focused. How did you think about innovation during that period? Would you say it was primarily focused on acquisition, or did we continue that internal development? Was it some combination? How did you think about that?
Well, it was a combination, and I would say, just as I mentioned, when you think about the endosurgery businesses, you think about let's say the cardiology business. As I mentioned, we didn't really have a cardiology business. We had a tiny, I'll call it franchise, called Mansfield, which had one balloon catheter. That was about it. And an early, believe it or not, back in the early 1990s, we also had an interventional imaging platform, one of the earliest IVUS platforms. That was about it. So if you look and say, well, were we just doing M&A? The answer is no. Actually, there were no there were no urology companies to buy. There were no endoscopy companies to buy. And you look at the power of that GI franchise today, that was vastly created through internal continuous innovation. And that, I think, demonstrates Boston Scientific's absolute, undeniable capacity to innovate. At the same time, cardiology was an emerging fast growth area, and Boston really didn't have a franchise. So, uh, in some ways, it's almost an understatement to say, uh, that we acquired, because the seminal acquisition in that period was the SciMed deal, which was done in 1995. And SciMed was nearly the same size as Boston. SciMed was all cardiology, had elegant catheter systems, a great management team, and that was effectively a merger of equals. Not exactly equal, but kind of, 60-40 combination. And then that company, as a combined entity, really exploded in growth. And so I think what people have to realize is Boston wasn't just doing tuck-in deals to add a product. It was really transforming itself. It was really betting the ranch on the need to scale, the need to expand technologies and management capabilities, and the boldness of those moves. If you think about it on a relative basis, for a company to acquire another company that was equal to 60% its size, how many things can go wrong? How often do companies bet that boldly? It puts it in perspective that this is not a Boston buying an Axonics. This is not a Boston buying a Nalu. This was a bet the farm, reconstruct yourself, put yourself into entirely new markets, remake the whole management team, and go with the best of breed. And I think Boston deserves credit for having really been much bigger at risk taking than you see today in any capacity.
Yeah. So I like that a lot. Brings me back to some of the things that we were doing at the time were very bold, and they felt that way. It was exciting for sure. You in your role, you had the unenviable task of trying to balance the boldness and the risk taking, while also trying to scale an operation and scaling distribution and sales and so forth. How did you balance the boldness, the risk taking with the operational discipline that was needed?
Well, it's a great question. And the first thing I would say is, listen, there were a lot of fantastic people at the company. Pete and John were there. Pete was, of course, the CEO. We had a management team, especially after the merger with SciMed, that included people like Mike Berman and Jim Corbett, Dan Cole. So when that team came together, we had a number of, I think, skilled operators. And something really important to observe. Boston was a couple $100 million company. SciMed was a couple $100 million company. We started to do tuck-in acquisitions after that of specialty franchises that we thought would give us an important phrase, strategic mass in building out our product portfolio. Larry Best was the CFO and really the architect of the M&A strategy. And so we realized at that time that this was not a $5 billion company adding $50 million franchises. There was no infrastructure. We did not have a global ERP system or an operating system. We did not have a global quality system. We were really small companies coming together absent a core. And we were trying at that point to build a core, of a chassis to build the company onto that did not exist, right? Because Boston was early in its growth. It was scaling rapidly. It had not had a chance at that point to really build out all of the business processes and the operating systems necessary upon which today you would do bolt-ons. Well, you can't, what are you bolting on to? And so it was a combination of exactly what you described: move as quickly as possible to add new technologies and add market leadership capability in our described, market segments, but at the same time build the company out So that was very consciously done. Of course, it was fits and starts. We didn't always get it right. Sometimes we realized we were really lagging behind. How do you merge customer systems? How do you, today we drive by the Quincy facility, which is, of course, the very large distribution center. Well, that didn't exist. We didn't have global distribution, global customer service, global order entry. We didn't have any of those things. And so all of those had to be built in parallel while we were doing M&A and adding new technology companies that themselves were brand new to the business and were coming in. And it's a question of, well, what are they coming into? Do we have the receivers on the receiving end? And we had to build out all of those receivers in real time.
Yeah, that's good. And good to look back. I love the Quincy reference because whenever I drive by on Route 93 and drive by that building and look over fondly at the big Boston Scientific name on the side of a very shiny building, well,
Well,
that's
it
not
used
the
to
way
be
it was.
when we bought it, it was a furniture warehouse, just to put it in perspective. And we bought it because it was so close to the airport. And what we really were trying to drive was the ability to ship customers in California overnight. And in order to take an order on the phone, right? You didn't have electronic ordering. In order to take an order on the phone from California as late as possible in the day on the East Coast, load that product in the warehouse and put it on a plane and get it to California overnight so that customer could have a product on the shelf by 10 o'clock the next morning. We had to have the ability to pick and pack and ship product as close to the airport as possible. And so the Quincy warehouse location gave us that proximity and allowed us to keep our customer service line open until 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern, get that product picked. If a customer ordered the product at 1 minute before 9 o'clock, we could still get it on a FedEx plane and to them by the next morning. And that's how the whole distribution system was designed.
That's great. And it worked fantastically. I can't tell you the number of people who said, what the hell are you doing with the distribution center in Boston? It should be in
Well,
Memphis.
that was when we had a lot of manufacturing in Boston as well. And so as you distribute your plant network around the country and around the world, having a global hub in Boston is not necessarily the end design. But at that time, it was a great way to aggregate supply chains flowing from our plants into one hub and adjacent to, not immediately, but close to headquarters. And then again, with that overnight capability. So that served a great purpose. But as in so many things, the sophistication and scale of the business has outgrown that core strategy. But I understand it's still an important part of their supply chain.
So Paul, looking back, if you were building Boston Scientific today, anything you would do differently?
Well, first of all, the team running Boston Scientific today has done so magnificently well that it would be impossible to say they should do anything else. Listen, hindsight is clear. I would say, yeah, there are a million things. People always say, "Well, have no regrets." I regret every thing that wasn't done perfectly or every opportunity that was missed. And so, do I look at a technology that could have been acquired? And it's the same thing as a venture capitalist. You look at the deals that you pass on, someone else does them 5 years later, they become a winner, and you ask yourself, what did I miss at that time? The same thing is true on the other end of the spectrum. You do a deal that you think was going to work out, and then it runs into a risk and ends up not working out, and you say, geez, what could I have done differently? So I think all of us should always and every day we wake up and we should ask that very same question, Bryan. What should we have done differently? What could we have done differently? Could Boston Scientific, where would Boston Scientific be today in the cath lab if they had bought Shockwave? Well, they could have bought Shockwave, maybe 5 years ago. You could say the same thing about many things, but how can you look at their performance and say that it's been anything other than spectacular? And nobody can hit on everything. So I have two answers. As an operator, yes, there are 100 things I regret, and that falls halfway into those things that we should have done that we did not, and those things that we shouldn't have done that we did. At the same time, at the 30,000-foot level, you look at it and say, hey, listen, you can't complain. You can't get everything right. You built a fantastic business. You've had extraordinary shareholder returns, and it's not a straight trajectory, right? There's lumpiness. There are things that go wrong along the way, but in the aggregate, that team has done a brilliant job. And as I look at, when I left in 2008, it was also a spectacular run. So no regrets.
Yeah, good. Okay. Let's shift to your role at SV Health Investors. So you went from operating on the inside, one of the biggest med tech companies, to funding and guiding the next generation of innovators. And in this role, you've led the firm or been a part of the leadership of the firm through the recessions in 2008 and through COVID and into today's kind of unusual environment. How have you seen the role, approach, and strategy of venture capital evolve during that time?
Well, it's evolved a lot. Venture, if you think about venture capital as a financial sector, as a practice, is not that old. So if you then say, how has it changed over a 20-year period? Well, 20 years might be half the life of the field of venture capital. So it's changed a lot. SV is exclusively a healthcare investor. MedTech is part of what's invested, but we also invest in biotechnology and in healthcare services. I think that's a really important distinction because MedTech has its own patterns as a venture and investment field. And then when you layer in the comment you made about either the 2008 recession or the financial collapse really, or the aftermath of the pandemic, those are difficult times that stress investment themes and investment vehicles. And so then you have to step back and say, okay, well, how do you get through those? So first of all, MedTech has been in favor some years and not in favor in other years as a function of, is the IPO market open or closed? Has there been strategic consolidation? When a Boston acquires a Guidant, you lose a buyer. When an Abbott buys a St. Jude, you lose a buyer. When a Becton Dickinson buys a Bard, you lose a buyer. And so we've seen macro consolidation in our space that's reduced the number of buyers. There aren't that many buyers in medtech relative to what we see, let's say, in biotech. And when you compound that with the opening or the closing of the IPO window for our sector, you end up with periods where you can have dry spells for exit activity. And that creates an upstream problem, right? Because you have investors who look at that and say, well, if I'm put my money in 2010, how do I get my money out by 2015 or 17? And if you see consolidation of buyers, if you see limited IPO opportunities, it becomes a more challenging thesis compounded by regulatory, payment, and clinical and commercial risk. So it's a harder formula to support, but it continues to be a thriving industry. MedTech strategic growing in spectacular form, double-digit growth for many. We all know intrinsically, if we've been a part of the innovation process in MedTech, that we're part of the solution. We're bringing clinical economic value propositions to healthcare delivery. So it's a great space to be. It's not a pure winner every time on the investment side just because of some of those difficulties. And the last thing I'll say is that if you go back to 2008 or the period after that, where you have liquidity crunches and where you have literally investment firms that had agreements to draw capital from investors, and those investors no longer had the capital, right? That changes everything. So there was a Darwinian effect on the market that was unanticipated, unprecedented, and not fair in a lot of ways. You could have had a perfectly good portfolio with prescribed investment requirements for each of your companies, and then all of a sudden you say, I have 2 years of capital plan, but now you need to stretch that for 4 years. Well, that may or may not be possible, right? You have 12 mouths to feed in your portfolio, and now you realize you only have capital reserves to feed six. The same thing happened in the aftermath of the pandemic. Fundamental structural disruption in the availability of capital to fund companies. So some firms didn't survive that. Could have been just timing, could have been just misfortune. And others survived it because they had enough reserves and enough time and enough portfolio diversity so that they could make some difficult calls, defund some companies, save their reserves, and pour them into others. So it was a very difficult time for all firms in that time. But uh, some of the companies that and firms that didn't do well or didn't survive through that, one could easily argue it was not anything they could have done differently because it's like building a house now in these days and say, well, it's in 100-year flood plain. Well, come to find out now we get floods every 5 years. Like, well, that's not the way it's supposed to be. That's not how we planned it. And I think that's what happens in the investing world sometimes as well.
Yeah. I mean, it seems like it's just that disruption is the norm. Change is the norm. It seems like always in this world, always have to be ready for, I mean, we don't know what's going to happen.
We don't
Um,
know. And to your point, you have to bank more on that disruptive reality than you might have done 10 and 15 years ago. That's just the nature of where we are.
so for all the innovators and entrepreneurs out there, any advice you would give them to weather whatever storm, whatever conditions we're facing currently? What would you tell them?
Well, if you have the opportunity, we always used to balance capital raises between dilution and runway. How much capital should you take at what price? I think that has fundamentally shifted, right? If you have an opportunity to raise capital, in many ways you take it and you don't think twice about relative valuation, relative optimization. Sure, some companies will that happen to be in the right place at the right time with their value proposition may be able to raise and be highly selective. But for the typical great medtech early stage company, uh, capital is king, and take what you can when you can get it. Because of the disruptive dynamic that you described, you don't know when your next opportunity will come along. So that is certainly a lesson. I think, listen, the world has become much more connected and much more sophisticated. There are pools of capital around the world that can be tapped. There are fewer, perhaps, active early stage medtech investors in the US. Strategics are becoming more active in some ways, moving earlier stage and filling some of that void. It used to be that a board would look at a strategic investor early in their capitalization and say, we don't want to take in capital from a strategic. It's too restrictive, or it might cap our returns potential. I think those are the kinds of decisions that you look at today and you say, you know what, if you've got capital available from a strategic, and in theory, it might cap a future exit, or it might scare away a different buyer. But in practice, it's a very positive development. They want to fund the company, and you have a good pathway there. You say, hey, you may not have the alternative. So you have to, I think, balance some of those alternative strategies more openly than you might have done 5 years ago, because you have to assume that you may not have as many shots on goal. And so I think just more open-mindedness is really the key.
Yeah, seems like if you're an entrepreneur, it's kind of a mixed coin, right? So being able to have those different paths for financing for money is great. So internationally, strategics from the venture source, but at the same time, you hear a lot of entrepreneurs that are struggling in getting funding right now. Some companies are doing very well and closing some very good rounds. And do you think, actually, let me say it a little different. What advice would you give to those entrepreneurs that are trying to close a round now, today, at
Well,
this point in time?
of course, every company is different, but having done this a number of times, first of all, you can't start socializing your story too early, right? You want to give investors a real advanced notice about what you have, why it's going to be interesting for them. Make sure they are thinking about you, even if your financing is in mid 26. You should be on their radar screen today. They should know you're coming. They should know what you're working on. They should know what your milestones are. And that gives you the opportunity when you launch a formal financing, let's say in Q2, it gives you an opportunity to say, you knew we were coming. We told you last year this is what we were going to do. Everything we told you we would do, we have done. We have made our value proposition more concrete. We're a safer bet than ever. Number one. Number two, I would say whatever time frame you have for planning to start and close a financing, you should extend that time frame. It takes longer. When you have financial uncertainty in the markets, investors are less inclined to make quick decisions. And so if you planned on launching a financing and closing it 5 months later, you should double that time frame. And you should be thinking about just the fact that hurdles exist on the investor side that are atypical and that generally speaking, whatever form those hurdles exist in, they will simply add time to the process it's going to take for you to complete a financing.
Got it. Okay, good. Okay, Paul, I'm going to have you put on yet another Paul hat. And in addition to your role at SV, you're the CEO and co-chair of a commercial stage publicly traded company, Pulse Biosciences. And in that role, you lead a high growth company that is expanding a technology platform, specifically nanosecond PFA, that's applicable across multiple therapeutic uses. So, how do you think about innovation in a company like Pulse? And are the challenges different than what you see in the early stage company or at the big company, Boston Scientific kind of stage?
Well, I think it's a composite company, right? It's an early stage company in the sense of one platform going commercial, brand new, basically first revenues in Q3. And then multiple IDE programs, right? So it's more than it's a platform company, and so therefore it's not a single program focused where everybody is focused on one thing, just do that thing. We're focused on multiple things. Number one. Number two, the world. There is no one in medtech that doesn't know about PFA and how dynamic a disruptive force that has become in multiple markets. So it's actually spectacular to have the ability to focus on one very potent, very proprietary platform. So we don't have to, unlike a Boston Scientific, we don't have to jump around from one platform to another, but we are, unlike a small focus company, moving from more than one market to another. So we do one thing in the form of optimizing the delivery of nanosecond PFA, but we do it across different delivery systems, different indications, different clinical specialties and channels. And so building out the company that way, I think, is unique. It's a lot of fun. We have the same innovation challenges that all early stage companies have. We've got to innovate technology and iterate delivery systems, as I mentioned. We have to drive preclinical research. We have to drive clinical research. We have to drive regulatory processes. When we get regulatory approvals, we have to decide what our go-to-market strategy is. Of course, we don't wait to the end for that, but we have to decide about the exact clinical claims and market. We have to decide about and describe the channel, the reimbursement strategy, and importantly for us, whether we're going to do that directly by building our own business unit or through partnerships based on the dynamics and competitiveness of a given market, where our technology can be highly disruptive, but where the capital efficiency of entering that market may disfavor a direct strategy.
Yeah. So would you say your biggest challenges in that kind of environment?
I think our challenges are the same as everyone's. We're a public company. We announced our earnings just yesterday. We have $95 million in the bank. There are a lot of things. We have multiple FDA approvals already granted. We have breakthrough designation. There are a lot of things that we have that are going incredibly well, but we also have to deal with getting IDE approvals. We have a government shutdown. We have to deal with CPT code progression. We have to generate a continuous flow of clinical evidence that satisfies our physician customers, satisfy regulators for approval, and then ultimately move payers to believe that this is something that is worth funding, worth paying for, and in our case, worth a premium. So we have the full suite of innovation and commercialization challenges, but we have the benefits of a tailwind from PFA and a micro tailwind, if you will, that is focused on our exclusive technology because it is unique. We think it's superior. We think it demonstrates superior clinical outcomes in a number of fields. And so our job is to execute on proving that out and then delivering on very specific commercialization and launch strategies for each of our respective businesses.
Great. Okay. Yeah, thank you for that. And then, so now I'd like to maybe tie it all together. So Paul, you've had a front row seat to the whole evolution of medtech, from the explosive growth years at Boston Scientific to the venture world you're in today. You've watched medtech evolve from, we talked about the catheter-based and cannula-based type of solutions, to now it's a lot of software, robotics, even artificial intelligence, dare I say. What in this evolution has surprised you the most? And then if you can comment on anything on where you see things maybe going.
Well, first of all, I entered the medical device space in 1980. And so if we roll the clock back 45 years, what surprises me, I would say, and it's something that can only be appreciated over the arc of time, the scale and sophistication of the med tech industry today is spectacularly beyond where one could have imagined it that time ago, 30, 40 years ago. I was involved in the very first coronary angioplasty system, right? First, if you think about coronary angioplasty, creating PCI, the interventional cardiology world that we know today, and how that has spawned the structural heart market that we know. It's like all of that goes back to the very first time a balloon was blown up in a coronary artery in the late 1970s. So it has grown so much. We take for granted today the dissemination of knowledge, the conversion of markets, the training of new techniques. It's a remarkable day today. So what I see today is a much more complex world, a much more sophisticated world, a much faster moving world, a much larger scale world than we've seen in the past. And then to your comment about software, AI, robotics, the pace is only increasing. And so when we think about the pace of change, and how to accommodate that in our companies, in our innovation strategies, in our capital planning world, that pace of change is moving so much faster. And you just have to accommodate that in your thinking, in your management of your company. So I think that's a real key. When you think about AI, and I think specifically about AI, and I think about the FDA, and FDA is very proud of leaning into AI, trying to and approving AI and trying to figure out how to use AI in its own review system and how to better accommodate AI-based innovation in devices. That is going to just be an accelerant on top of all the base technologies, because other than a product that simply is not connected or does not have software, AI is going to penetrate into everything in some way, shape, or form. And even for those devices that are not connected and generating data themselves, they can be
Yeah.
monitored, trends can be monitored, learning can be had at an accelerated rate because of AI overlays. So I do think that is a revolution that is going to be upon us. It is going to accelerate. It's going to be held back a little bit because we're in a regulated environment, but the regulators are trying to find ways to allow for AI to move uh, at a fast pace and not try to hold it back. So I just think the thing that surprises me most is the speed with which we now move and the rate at which innovation can drive change. And I think that's very favorable for innovators. You can introduce new concepts, you can advance their development, you can simulate their clinical performance, move through the clinical and regulatory processes in many ways faster, truncate, collapse that time required from idea to approval. And um, and that's very, very promising. But if you're not capable of working at that pace, you're going to be run over.
Yeah. For me, it's very exciting. Um, I mean, I love the pace of the change, and I agree with you. It's increasing, and I think in a very exciting way. And the things that I see companies like what you're doing at Pulse and which is some of the other investments I know you've made and building out those platforms and the speed at which, just even in the last few years, you can see how much it's increasing is significant. So Paul, any lessons from like going back in your kind of the older days that are applicable to the innovators today that you would say?
Well, the lessons are, I think they're much more fundamental. It's all about just hard work. Um, and I think about being impatient, having passion for your technology. I think linking, if I think today about the sophistication as an example of a Stanford biodesign program, you think, okay, there's a whole program that exists solely for the purpose of perfecting and teaching how to optimize innovation in med tech. That is spectacular. That wasn't known. Like they've taken that out of the raw material, if you will, of innovation over time, and they're beginning to really perfect that. If you think about that is spectacular. That's amazing. Those are lessons learned. If you think about the underlying principles there, it's about connecting physician practices with unmet patient needs and with novel technology and very clear identification of product and user performance and needs. If you think about that's all we do. If we do that well, what does it require? It requires talking to physicians. It requires looking at data and analyzing and asking good questions and coming up with clear answers and never stopping the process of challenging yourself to make sure your formula, your outcome, your solution is the right one. Don't stop challenging yourself to make sure your solution is right and always continuously pressure test it with more physician input, more analysis of the market opportunity and of the economic value proposition. If you do that, and we see it with companies today, you can still create unicorns and you can still have transformative launches the way we've seen technologies move in and disrupt. And right around here in Massachusetts, whether it's the Abiomeds of the world or the Boston Scientific solutions or Medtronic now running with Affera. There are so many things happening right here, right now, as that exemplify that innovation process, and it's happening in real time right around us.
Yeah. And I love that it comes down to exactly why I'm in this. A lot of us are in this, that connection to the physician, the patient needs, the having something novel that can really improve the experience, the care, the outcomes, and being able to show it. So that's
It's
the
out there.
constant.
It's happening in real time. I think that's our message. It's happening right before our eyes.
Terrific. Okay, so Paul, we're almost at time to turn it over to Q&A, but I want to do a quick rapid fire with you.
Okay.
Okay, so I got four questions for you. What's one technology or scientific area aside from PFA that you're personally most excited about right now?
Well, broadly speaking, I would say neuromodulation. Just the idea of introducing stimulations either that target the brain or the end organs and that change chronic conditions. That is a field that is it's vibrant today, but it's just really beginning. And I think the broader field of neuromodulation is going to continue to evolve and unleash many new, very important clinical breakthroughs.
I love it. Artificial intelligence in medtech. Is it a game changer now, or let's wait and see?
If you wait and see, you're going to be 6 feet under.
Perfect. What's the best piece of leadership advice you've ever received?
You know, I don't know. I would just say lead from the front. Leadership is it's about passion. People want to be led. It's easy to lead if you just show your true self, be your true self, and care about what you're doing and care about the people that are around you. It's very simple, but a lot of people struggle to do it well. But just really care about people, listen, and expose yourself, right? Take risks and put yourself into positions of where you can fail, and then just don't let that happen.
Okay, the last one before we go over to Q&A. And in one word or phrase, what gives you optimism about the future of medtech?
We are a big part of the solution.
Amen. Absolutely. Okay, good. Paul, thank you. So now I'll open it up to anyone who has questions. So let me see if I can get the QA sorted out here without having to pull Rachel in. Okay, so first question is, I wonder if Paul views the current status of medtech as more or less turbulent than biotech pharma. Biotech and pharma always lured with its higher salaries, but the current state of biotech looks less enticing with so many layoffs happening, companies closing. I think that's it. So I guess the question is more medtech, more or less turbulent than biotech pharma. Any comparisons? I know SV is involved in all those categories.
I think
Thoughts?
medtech is more turbulent, and I say that because biotech does have turbulence, as has been alluded to by the questioner, that it's not um, a unilateral growth engine producing billion-dollar winners every day. But biotech slash biopharma is still so much bigger. There are so many companies, so many shots on goal, and so much bigger a market to go into when you think about strategic acquirers or IPOs. That the likelihood that a biotech can just predictably land on its feet is high. And medtech as an innovation ecosystem is more fragile. It's more fragile for sources of capital, for lack of early stage venture. As I mentioned before, more fragile with the closing of an IPO window or the limited number of strategic acquirers. So I do think, I don't want to be negative toward medtech, but I do think in comparison to biotech, medtech is more fragile and more susceptible to volatility. So that if each category undergoes volatility, biotech has the inherent ability to weather it more smoothly, and medtech has the potential to be thrown more off kilter.
Yeah, sounds good. And it does seem like medtech is turbulent and fragile right now for sure. Next question we have, Paul, is what is a piece of advice that you do not recommend following?
Well, don't do anything stupid. Listen, who knows? I I think some of the things I mentioned before, when you think about trying to be too fine, too cute by half, if you will, in financing strategies, in boards advising management teams to hold out for this or uh, anything that involves a lack of humility. I think we have to be humble as we build companies. That doesn't mean you're not bold in your vision. It doesn't mean you're unwavering in your passion. You are those things. But when you look externally and say, all right, I have to capitalize this, or all right, I need to be mindful of risks in regulatory or in reimbursement. Be humble. And therefore, when you hear advice that has you stretch beyond the realm of reason, it doesn't mean you're not passionate. It doesn't mean you're not pursuing with incredible vigor your vision, but lace that with humility. So don't follow advice that you think has an element of hubris in it, where you're not listening to reality or you're not up to on market facts, because that can get you in trouble.
Yeah, sounds good. Okay. Rich, we do have one more question that came in from the side here.
I also
So
have one too when you're done.
why don't you go first?
Well, if we talk about the turbulence, Paul, I would, or the fragility, I would be curious, two things. Do you think there's a way that medtech could become less fragile, or that we could manage the perception of fragility, right? Because it's really that perception in the market that leads to a bit of a struggle for funding and for excitement. So, do you think there's a way to manage the perception of that fragility or even the fragility itself?
I think the answer is yes. And I think it comes in two forms. One is when you think about you want to match what you're trying to build with that relative fragility. If you match with what's available in that market, you can have a good outcome, even if the overall market has some fragility in it. So then you say, well, what's making it fragile? Well, maybe it's harder to do $50 million financings, or maybe it's harder to do $1 billion exit after you've raised money on a $400 million pre or post, and now you can't get your desired exit multiple. So if you say, okay, well, what is the market willing to tolerate? And then you back up from that and say, well, they're willing to tolerate companies that have $50 million of invested capital, but they're much less tolerant to companies that have $200 million of invested capital. You say, okay, well then what company am I building? How many shots on goal do I have? How much clinical trial demand will I have to fund? You say, can I do it? Can I fit my business building process into a less bold structure so that by the time I get to the end, I'm not dependent upon a situation, a scenario to exit where the odds are just stacked against me. So again, it's just a little bit of environmental scanning. Now that doesn't mean, listen, if you're already way down the path and you've built for a very big exit, there may be no going back. But if you're starting with enough of a clean sheet where you can customize how you build it, if most exits in medtech happen at the $200 million level or less, then build companies for that. Because if you're building for a $750 million exit and that represents only 2% of all medtech exits, then how likely is it that your company is going to be in the 2%? If you want to take that chance, go ahead. But when you think about fragility or volatility, you think about what's really happening is there's a mismatch between where the capital is and where the exits are. Okay, well then better align that and you can have a much higher batting average.
Makes sense. So Paul, this is a mass medic event. Rachel, that's the question that I thought maybe you were going to ask. Um, and you deal West Coast, Midwest, of course, East Coast, all over the world. How would you contrast the Boston area ecosystem versus other med tech ecosystems, and what could we do to be better?
Well, it's funny. I gave a talk to an Orange County group just a few days ago, and they were asking the same question, trying to build, the Orange County medtech ecosystem. And of course, we all know about Medical Alley, and there's a lot of strength in the Bay Area. I mentioned Stanford Biodesign. So, listen, I think Boston is a really strong ecosystem in general. I'm sitting in a portfolio company as we speak. And this company is thriving, and it's in the Boston suburbs, and it's been built here. So you think about technology, where technology comes from. You think about technologists. You think about access to talent and management and capital, all available in the Boston area. So Boston is very strong. Boston doesn't, we, as a metaphor, you think about the Boston Globe as our principal, newspaper, and the Boston Globe likes to attack its institutions, right? If you go to Minnesota, you spend a lot of time in Minnesota. Actually, Minnesota institutions don't attack each other. Like the Star Tribune does not attack the University of Minnesota and say, let's talk about all the things that are wrong here. So I do think we have the challenge of a little bit less cohesive ecosystem where we don't necessarily align all of our academic, financial, and entrepreneurial activities into one. MassMedic is a very strong institution, but it deals with raw material that's a little bit less organized because we don't wake up in the morning and think about, oh, how nice would it be to have a great article in the business section of the Boston Globe about, all these innovative companies. They would much rather talk about a company that's struggled or a CEO that did something wrong. That's just kind of the nature of the really critical environment that I think we live in Boston. So we have to overcome that. I'd like to see us be a little bit more organized in bringing together all of those influences that enable entrepreneurial success, because we do have fantastic corporations, we have fantastic medical centers and academic institutions, really the best in the world, and we have a thriving medtech ecosystem here, but I do think it could, if it performs on, five cylinders, I'd like to see it hit on all eight cylinders.
Makes sense.
Excellent question, and I don't think I could have answered that any better. And that could be a whole nother webinar, Paul, for another time, because I could get on a big soapbox to agree with you on so many points right there. But I know we are right up on time, and everyone's got a very busy schedule. So if you'll allow me, I'll just say thank you, Paul and Bryan. Thank you so much for an excellent conversation. There were a lot of key takeaways, I think, and a lot of things I was not jotting down, nodding along in the background and saying, ooh, I actually didn't even think about that one. So very well done. And thank you so much for sharing both of your
Thank you, Rachel.
perspectives with the
You're
audience.
welcome, and thank you, Paul, and really good to see you again.
Thanks, Bryan. My pleasure. Thanks for asking me.
Everyone have a wonderful day, and we'll see you at another program in the future. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Rachel.